Hello, everyone. Hope everyone has had a good, make that great holiday season. We're now in the last few days of 2022, and I wanted to take the time to look at how far Shelly Aquatics has come this year, and wanted to thank each and every one of you out there who played a part. That goes out to anyone who has purchased anything on my website, markshellyaquatics.com, or anyone who watches the videos, whether it be customers, viewers, and even fellow YouTubers. I have so many more people now that I can call friends than I did when 2022 started. The entire point of what I do is to help spread the hobby of shrimp keeping and to make it as easy and accessible to as many people as possible, and to be able to provide healthy homebred shrimp at an affordable price. I think I've made good on that mission in 2022 and hope to do an even better job in 2023. So let's take a look at how 2022 started. Well, let's go back to the very end of 2021, exactly 1 year ago. I worked right up until the day before Christmas Eve. Basically, my job said, "Merry Christmas. We'll probably call you back to work in the spring, maybe not." At the time, I had never been laid off or drawn unemployment before, but it was at that time I knew I could no longer count on this company or even this line of work to make my living at anymore. It was honestly a pretty scary time, but turns out it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. I'd been making YouTube videos about my hobby for 5 or 6 years and launched my website at the beginning of 2021, but in reality, it was still just an expensive hobby that was mostly just paying for itself, nothing even close to being able to make a living from. I ended up being laid off from work up until the end of March. During those 3 months, I poured myself into breeding shrimp, my tanks, and YouTube. When you don't spend over half your waking hours working for a paycheck, you have lots and lots of time to figure out new ways of doing things. Basically, I had 3 months to improve everything about my shrimp, my tanks, and my YouTube channel. I'd always dreamed that maybe someday I could possibly quit my job. But it was always more of a maybe someday in the distant future when the kids were all grown and I could look at it as an early retirement type of thing. About the time I was called back to work is when things really started to take off there at the end of March. Right before going back to work, I was making about the same amount of money I did when I was working. So I had already built myself back up to at least making my paycheck by the end of those 3 months. But with 3 kids and as much as everything costs these days, I needed to be absolutely 100% sure this would be a long-lasting, sustainable situation. I go back to work and things didn't slow down. In fact, they kept growing and growing and growing. Then Mark over at Mark Shrimp Tanks gave me a huge shout out on his channel while I was in the middle of working a string of 60-hour weeks. That brought in another big boom of business and new customers. Working 60 hours a week, making YouTube videos, and shipping hundreds of shrimp every week became too much to handle. So by June of this year, 2022, I told my boss my business is taking off, and I'm much better spending my time working for myself. And here's my 2 weeks. Doing my business and working for those 3 months, while horribly exhausting and unsustainable for me in the long term, did allow me to save up a decent chunk of change, and that became my working capital for what is now Shelly Aquatics. There were still quite a few question marks when I left my job. Number one being the fact that I honestly didn't even know if I could sustainably breed enough shrimp to keep this going for the long term. And at first I was probably not. But again, when you don't have to spend most of your waking hours working for a paycheck, you have lots of time to learn and figure out better ways to do things. Those 3 months of being laid off was just the beginning. When your hobby becomes your job and you tend to get pretty good at it, I guess you could say. I have managed to get most of my tanks to be the best that I know how as of currently, and it is indeed possible for me to breed enough shrimp to sustain this after getting better at it. It is always important to realize that it is an ongoing, ever-changing process. You're always learning better ways to do things. I've learned more about shrimp and tanks in the last year than I ever could have dreamed about knowing while it was still just a part-time hobby thing. When you completely immerse yourself into it. My most recent change I have made is how I ship shrimp. Though I had the process down pretty good without very many losses, after recent changes to how I ship, I have completely eliminated my biggest problem, at least thus far, and that is the boxes getting crushed in shipping. Basically, USPS manhandling and beating the heck out of my boxes. While it's not a super common occurrence, it was one of those things that you notice more and more as the volume of shipments increases. But now, since making the needed changes, this happened 0 times over the last month. Like I said, you're always learning and figuring out new and better ways to do things. I've had many of you guys send me very nice, heartfelt emails telling me how I've been an inspiration to them, being able to do this hobby full time. And many of you guys ask if I think it is still possible for a new person to get into it and do what I do. The answer is for sure yes. But you'll need to be prepared to put in the work and time, have the space, and so on. When I look back at my past life experiences, it really does make sense for me to do what I do now. I've had tanks since I was just a little guy of about 7 years old, and I've been keeping planted tanks for over 20 years now. I spent the first 10 years of my adult life being a freelance web developer. Basically, I taught myself HTML when I was a senior in high school, and you had to actually know HTML to make a web page back then. They didn't have programs to do it for yourself, so if you knew basic HTML, you could make one heck of a living back in 1999. I then went back to school around the age of 30 and got a degree in computer information technology. Having a lifetime experience keeping aquatic animals and the basic technical skills to make all of this a reality has been big. I feel like I am doing what I was intended to do when you take into account all my past life experiences. So what is new for 2023, you might ask? Well, I will say this for sure. 100% without a doubt. The main thing that will always stay the same is that the animals I sell will be the animals that have been bred and born in my tanks. That is my thing. I only sell what I breed and the plants that I grow. I have absolutely no desire to buy and resell shrimp. But as I said earlier, the more you do it, the more you learn, and the better you get at it. So my plan is to keep getting better and better at my craft of breeding shrimp in natural planted tanks. Thank you guys for watching. Bye.